Good evening, and welcome back to Midnight Sleep Scientist, a calm corner of the universe where curiosity drifts like starlight. Before we set out, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Feel free to share where you're listening from tonight: city window, farmhouse porch, lakeside cabin, or a quiet room where a street lamp paints a pale square on the wall. And now, let's drift. Tonight's journey carries us into the wide hush of the Boötes Void, an immense tender scarcity in the cosmic web, not empty exactly, but spacious, a resting place between bright galactic avenues, where distance softens and time seems to loosen its grip. Think of clusters as cities, filaments as long night roads, and this region as the open prairie between quiet, breathable, unhurried. We'll move gently, we'll touch, with kindly perhapses, on what astronomers mean by a void, how maps of red-shifted light revealed vast rooms of quiet, and why emptiness in the universe often signals structure gathering elsewhere. Gravity's long patience, the hidden scaffolding of dark matter, the way galaxies prefer the edges, offered like stepping stones set far apart across a shallow stream. If sleep arrives mid-journey, let it, the story will keep its lantern lit. And if you're still with me at the end, we'll carry a little of that spaciousness back into the small, steady rhythms of this hour. The Boötes Void is not a demand, but an invitation to rest, to widen, to wonder softly. Tonight begins with something simple: a window lit faintly by the kind of glow that comes from a resting house. The room is a hush of ordinary things: a clock with a softened tick, fabric that remembers the shape of your day, a coolness that suggests the night has settled into its own rhythm. Outside, a small pattern of stars, not many, just enough to hint that there is more beyond the roofline, beyond the trees, beyond the slow pulse of your own breath. If you ease your attention toward that sky, you might notice how darkness is not a single shade. It is layered, a gradation, from the near to the far, from the familiar silhouettes of chimneys and leaves to the delicate scattering of starlight that traveled years, even centuries, to touch your eyes. Each point is a message from a different now. Some are young, some are old, and together they form a quiet map that we, over time, have learned to read. Imagine, just for a few heartbeats, that this map opens. The rafters lift away, the air thins, and our gaze carries us above the neighborhood, above the city grid and river bends, above the atmosphere's gentle blue. We step into the softness of Earth's night side and see the curves of oceans like ink and silk. There is a feeling the planet gives from here, something like contentment, still turning, still keeping its balance, still holding. Now, let that view widen. Continents become colors, oceans become a single sweep, and the moon is no longer a companion, but a stone held at arm's length. Beyond it, the solar system unwinds like a mobile, planets in slow, careful arcs. Farther still, the sun becomes a dot among dots, and the familiar pattern of our constellations, those shapes we named from the warmth of campfires and city rooftops, dissolves into a deeper geometry. The Milky Way is a pale band, a long memory of stars, and then, almost at once, it changes in our minds from a band to a structure, a disk with spiral arms and hidden thickness, a home we rarely see from the outside, except in thought. We keep going. The Milky Way shrinks to a delicate wheel, then to a fleck, then to the faintest curl in a swarm of other curls, the local group, floating close to other gatherings, loose families stitched into a larger fabric. Gravity writes its soft suggestion across this fabric, persuading some regions to gather and others to thin. If we could run a hand across it, it might feel, just perhaps, like lace, a weave of bright threads, and open rooms, crossings and hollows. Some hollows are small, like pockets, some are greater spaces, broad and quiet, with only a few lights burning like distant porch lamps in winter. One of those spaces bears a name that tastes old and cool: Boötes, the herdsman, a constellation that rises in spring evenings, marked by the bright star Arcturus, a golden ember that has guided travelers for as long as we remember to be travelers toward that portion of the sky. If we step far enough away and look, there is a region of astonishing hush. They call it the Boötes Void, a place that, compared with its size, contains very little, perhaps a few dozen galaxies, where thousands might be expected. Not nothing, but close enough to hush that when we first traced it carefully, we hushed too. The word void can sound absolute, like an on off switch flipped to darkness, but space is rarely so simple. Even emptiness in the universe has texture. It has edges that are not hard walls, but gentle slopes, gradients where the galaxy count fades like snowfall at the edge of a field. The Boötes Void might be thought of as a valley in the cosmic landscape, an underdense basin whose slopes lead up to higher ground where galaxies cluster and braid together into filaments and walls. To appreciate the scale without tipping into overwhelm, we can try a small imagination. Hold a grain of salt between your fingers. Let it be the Milky Way. Now set that grain down on a tabletop that stands for the wider universe. If the tabletop were a country, or perhaps a continent, the Boötes Void would be a province of quiet, hundreds of millions of light years across, clearing of the forest where only a few trees stand. You could walk, and sometimes see a trunk, a leaf, a bird's shadow, and then long stretches of open meadow again. That is, in a humble way, the feeling it carries. When astronomers first began to chart the sky in 3 dimensions, they learned to treat light as a measure of distance. The redshift of a galaxy, how its light is stretched by the expansion of space, offered a dial we could read, a way of saying this one is farther, this one closer. Draw enough of those distances on a great invisible paper, and a picture emerges. In one of those early pictures, a strange, almost circular gap appeared near Boötes. It suggested an absence on a scale that was hard to believe at first glance, a cave where the stars had not gathered in their usual numbers. We paused, and then we looked harder. The deeper we looked, the more we realized that the cave was not entirely empty. There were lanterns, just far fewer than the surrounding halls. They were widely spaced, like quiet farms in a wide plain. A galaxy here, another there, each a city of stars in its own right, but separated by distances that even by cosmic standards felt like long unpaved roads. It was absence that taught us to look again. Sometimes the interesting thing is not what fills a space, but what decides not to. If we hover at the edge of this void in our thoughts and turn slowly, we notice that its borders are suggested by brightness, regions where the universe seems suddenly busy again. Filaments, like river valleys seen from high air, feed into one another. Superclusters, the capital cities of the cosmic web, gather their suburbs and satellite towns. The edge of emptiness is not a fence, but a shift in tempo. You might almost hear it, a change from a single bell across a field to the soft activity of a market square. The Boötes Void lies beside such squares, and perhaps it exists in part because they do matter flows toward where matter already is, and the lowlands are left quieter, expanded by the tide of everything else. There is a quiet wonder in the fact that a place can be defined by what it mostly lacks. We feel that in our lives too. An empty afternoon can be a gift, room for the mind to uncurl, room for a thought to stretch. A winter field after snowfall holds a similar calm. The shape of what is not there is in its way a presence in the Boötes void. This presence is large enough to be felt by instruments and by the models that learn from them. It reminds us that the universe is not uniform oatmeal. It has structure and surprise, lullabies and drum beats. You might notice, as your breathing settles into a steady pattern, that your body understands this rhythm of fullness and space. A breath in, a breath out, a heartbeat, and the small silent interval after, muscles that soften when no action is needed. The nervous system recognizes room and relaxes into it. In that sense, the voids of the cosmos have a human echo. They are the pauses that make the music legible. Of course, there is the gentle caution we always carry into stargazing. Measurements change and refine. What we call an edge is an agreement we make to handle the complexity, and the counts we quote are snapshots that grow more detailed as surveys deepen and instruments become more sensitive. Even so, the broad picture remains. The universe is a web, and voids like Boötes are part of its pattern. To feel that pattern, to feel the drama without needing it to be loud, is to let the night teach us about balance. If we drift inward now, if we imagine a slow glide through the Boötes void itself, the experience would not be blackness. There would still be starlight, faint and far. There would still be galaxies, though you might spend a very long time crossing between them. The distances would become part of the scenery, like a desert where the horizon is both near and endlessly far. The galaxies themselves, the residents of this sparse district, might look much like others we know, spirals, ellipticals, irregulars, each with its own history of birth clouds and supernovae, of stars finding their stable light and planets taking shape in bowls of dust. Life, if it ever took hold in such a place, would not feel a lack. It would know only its sky, a little less crowded, a little more blue-black between the points of fire. There's a comforting humility in that thought. Emptiness is relative to expectation. We expected the same density everywhere. The universe offered variety. What seems sparse from one vantage becomes ordinary from another. The Boötes Void is a chapter in a larger book, a quiet page that lets the eyes rest before the next busier illustration. If you picture the cosmic web as a living thing, and many of us do, if only as a metaphor, the voids are its lungs. They expand as the universe expands, dilations within the fabric that keep the whole from feeling cramped. Gravity draws matter toward junctions, while space itself stretches the distances between. These two movements, the gathering and the opening, are not in conflict. They are partners in the long choreography of structure. The Boötes void, large as it is, participates in that dance, influenced by the same fundamental rules that let atoms assemble and planets orbit, and you just now feel the pull of rest. Back at our window, the street has grown quieter. A single car's distant sweep, a small crackle in a heater, a soft shift of air through a seam. Think of how this ordinary quiet feels in your body. There's a sense of being held, of having enough space to loosen, but not so much that you float away. The sky outside contains its own equivalents, crowded star cities, and regions where silence has room to deepen. Both are necessary, and knowing about one makes the other more beautiful. If your eyes grow heavy, you might let them close and keep the image anyway. A dark bowl with a few lights, a hush that seems to hum. Imagine drifting at the rim where the first filaments brighten like dawn on distant hills. Imagine the way a single galaxy, seen from such a remove, resembles a lantern kept lit on purpose, not to banish night, but to mark continuity. In every direction, the universe continues, and here, in one direction, it offers us a lesson in breadth. We will, in time, trace how we came to find this place on the map, how surveys and careful listening to light revealed a great hollow with a name we love to say. We will speak about redshifts and distances in the gentlest way, about how the web built itself from faint ripples into strands strong enough to hold galaxies. But for now, it is enough to rest with the idea that there are rooms in the universe where the furniture is sparse, the floor wide, the ceiling high, and the echo low. Rooms that let us think slowly, breathe easily, and soften as the night goes on. The Boötes Void is not an absence in the frightening sense. It is an invitation, a reminder that pattern includes pause, and here, with your shoulders unclenching and your jaw easing loose, you can follow that reminder toward sleep. Let the great quiet be a blanket. Let the distance between the stars be like the distance between thoughts, widening just enough for rest to enter. And if a small curiosity remains, you can place it gently on the bedside table for morning, the respectful promise that the story continues, just not now. For now, the shape of quiet is wide and kind. The universe hums at the edges, and you are comfortably at its center, listening as the softest parts of space teach you how to settle. In the soft draft of the night, we turn the page and step into a quieter kind of adventure, the kind that happens at a desk with a lamp and a stack of paper, where patience does the traveling and light itself becomes a guide. The story of how we found the Boötes Void begins not with a telescope alone, but with a way of listening to what starlight is trying to say. Imagine a beam of light as a note from a faraway instrument. If the universe is stretching, as our best understanding suggests, then that note is pulled a little longer by the time it reaches us. Its pitch slides downward, very slightly, a redshift. To measure such a shift is to hold a ruler against time's quiet river. It tells us how far the note has traveled, and in a sense, what kind of distance lives between its source and our eyes. Early sky mappers learned to use this musical stretch. They would point their instruments along a thin, deliberate path, what they called a pencil beam, measuring the redshift of each galaxy they caught in that narrow line. Plot those distances on a sheet, and the result begins to look like rainfall across a garden. Here a cluster of droplets, there a gap, then another flurry, and then, perhaps, a long dry spell. It was in such a pattern, drawn and redrawn by cautious hands, that an astonishing dryness appeared toward Boötes, a clearing so broad that the page seemed to hold its breath. At first, it might have looked like a trick, a misstep in the pointing, a bias in the sample, the ordinary ways that measurements lead us astray. The scientists who noticed it did what careful minds do. They doubted, and then they checked. More points, more pencil beams, more patient listening to light. The gap remained, Where a region of that size might have been pricked by thousands of galaxy lanterns, there were only a few dozen, a deep underdensity, like winter grass pressed flat by wind. The year is less important than the feeling of that moment, a blend of wonder and restraint. To declare a void is to speak about what mostly isn't there, and absence is a delicate claim. But as surveys spread, wider fields, deeper exposures, better instruments, the quiet patch toward Boötes kept its shape. Not a perfect circle, not a hard edged bowl, but a recognizable hollow in the web, the kind of silence that you can hear even after the room grows a little livelier. Redshift surveys became atlases. Lines were joined by slices, slices by cones, and cones by whole maps of the sky, each point a galaxy placed in 3 dimensions. Standing inside such a map, whether in a mind's theater or on a glowing screen, you could see filaments like country roads meeting at bright towns. Between them, the subdued districts. The boat test region showed as one of those districts writ large, a testament to the universe's taste for contrast. There is a special grace to the way scientists speak about surprises. They don't rush to metaphors, though a few slip in. They don't build myths, though the names we give carry a certain music. They weigh the data, they look for selection effects, those small, quiet biases that creep in when instruments prefer some kinds of light over others. They ask whether dust might be hiding something, whether the faintest galaxies skimmed below the net, and then they do the slow, necessary thing. They wait for independent confirmations. Over years, the Buddha's hollow persisted, widened and reshaped by new information, but recognizable, a cathedral of distance, with only a handful of candles lit within. If we linger with the method, because method has its own steadying beauty, we might imagine the glass of a spectrograph spreading a galaxy's light into a slim rainbow. In that rainbow sit fingerprints, lines where atoms in stars and gas have absorbed or emitted particular colors. Those lines should appear in known places by laboratory standards, but in the spectrum of a far galaxy, they slide. Measure the slide, and you have the redshift. Translate the redshift gently and with care for the cosmological model, and you have a distance. Pile up enough distances, and the empty places rise from the paper like bas relief. To the human ear, all this can sound exact, as if the universe were a solved puzzle. But even here, perhaps especially here, we remind ourselves to soften. The conversion from redshift to distance leans on the expansion rate of the cosmos, a number that we measure and debate, refine and revisit. The edges of a void depend on the algorithm that draws them. The count of resident galaxies grows as instruments learn to see the faint, and yet, through all such careful caveats, the shape of Boötes remained big, quiet, improbable feeling, and real enough to be used as a landmark in the geography of the cosmic web. There is a modest romance to the archives of discovery. Typed notes, early plots, a hand-drawn circle on a scatter of points. You can almost feel the room, chalk dust, an old radiator, coffee cooling too quickly in winter air. A door opens. Someone says, "Look at this." No exclamation point, just the invitation to witness strangeness together. The strangeness here was not a new light, but an unexpected darkness. Not a flare, but a hush. It turned out that the night sky, when mapped in depth, contains its own deserts. Perhaps you know the feeling of driving late along a road with long stretches between towns, a few windows lit on a far hill, then nothing for a while but the low, even sound of your own engine and the gentle sway of the car. The Boötes Void is that kind of drive. A human metaphor, yes, but a helpful one. It tells us that emptiness at scale feels like patience, like distance stretched thin, like time made visible by the spaces between events. By the time the Boötes Void had taken its place on our maps, a broader picture had come into focus. Galaxies were not scattered randomly, like seeds thrown by a hurried hand. They traced a structure that could be felt across hundreds of millions of light years. Walls and filaments and nodes. Yes, but also the rooms between them, where gravity's net has fewer knots. One cannot have one without the other. The loudness of the bright regions is measured in part by the softness beside them. We will return to this map again and again. For now, it is enough to know that the way we found the great nothing was by listening carefully to light, believing what the distances whispered, and letting absence stand as evidence. In that small revolution of trust, astronomy grew more spacious, and our sense of the universe gained a new kind of peace. Let your shoulders ease. Imagine those early plots like constellations on paper and the simple, steady joy of watching a pattern emerge. A pattern that includes the Boötes hollow, an address in the ledger of the night where fewer stars have chosen to gather. This is how we found it, and how gently it found a home in our imagination, too. Close your eyes for a moment and picture foam on a tide pool at dusk. Thin white lines snake and join, enclosing dark pockets that drift and change shape as the water breathes. The foam is bright, the pockets quiet. Neither is the whole. Together they are the pattern. Astronomers, looking outward over scales that would make continents seem small, describe something similar. The universe at the grandest levels appears to arrange itself like lacework, luminous strands crossing to form junctions, wide sheets folding like drapery, and between them, velvety hollows. This is the cosmic web, and the Boötes Void is one of its deeper chambers. How does such a web arise? The story we tell, supported by simulations and surveys, yet always spoken with a shy nod to uncertainty, begins in smallness. In the early universe, tiny variations in density, scarcely more than whispers, were present in the nearly uniform sea. Under gravity's patient hand, the slightly denser places gathered more matter, becoming denser still. The slightly emptier places, by comparison, emptied further. Over time, the contrast sharpened. Filaments drew themselves from this gentle imbalance, strands of matter, where galaxies would one day flicker on like lights along a highway. As space expanded, the web did not merely stretch like taffy, it also deepened its relief. Matter streamed toward the nodes, toward the crossings, while the basins between them, the voids, widened and relaxed. If we could watch a sped up film of this process, the effect might look like frost lines growing on a window in winter, or mycelium pushing its threads through leaf mold. The forms are different, but the intuition carries growth along paths, quiet in the rooms. The Boötes region sits in this context, like a meadow between far hills. Around it, the universe raises bright ridges, superclusters, and long filaments that act as watersheds. Within, the density of galaxies lowers, not to zero, but to a fraction of the surrounding fields. What sets its particular size and shape may be a confluence of early conditions, how the initial ripples happen to overlap there, tuned by billions of years of gravitational choreography. It is not a mistake. It is a permitted variation, the way a piece of woven cloth naturally includes larger and smaller gaps. When we speak of filaments, we mean rivers of matter and galaxies flowing along invisible channels, sculpted by dark matter's quiet gravity. Dark matter, unseen but inferred by its tug, may account for much of the web's scaffolding. It neither shines nor absorbs, but it shapes ordinary matter. Hydrogen and helium, later enriched by starlight into heavier elements, rides these dark currents, collects in their knots, and lights up as stars are born within the gas. The web is thus both visible and invisible, a duet of the luminous and the latent. It helps to step through scale without hurry. A single spiral galaxy might be like a city, with suburbs of star clusters and satellite dwarf companions. A filament could be thought of as a highway system connecting many such cities, threaded through long stretches of night. Where highways intersect, we find great hubs, a tangle of galaxies interacting, merging, growing into something like a metropolis. Between the highways, the countryside, fewer towns, longer roads, starlight seen from farther away. Voids are not inert. Their very emptiness participates in the motion of the whole. In the lowlands of density, matter tends to drift outward, like air moving from high pressure to low. This can set up a slow wind on cosmic scales, a tendency for galaxies near a void's edge to be nudged toward the walls. Such flows might be measured as subtle deviations from the smooth expansion, tiny additions to a galaxy's recessional speed that carry the imprint of local geography. In this way, a void announces itself not just by darkness, but by motion. Yet the borders of such a place are soft. Ask where the Boötes Void begins and ends, and you might receive a gentle shrug and a sketch with dotted lines. Different methods draw different outlines. Spheres are convenient but imprecise. True shapes tend to be squished and stretched by the push and pull of neighbors. This ambiguity is not a failure, it is a signature of an organic pattern, the kind that grows from simple rules into complex forms. You might wonder whether life, were it to arise in a galaxy dwelling inside such a hollow, would sense the difference. The night sky there would still be jeweled, the Milky Way, seen from Earth's countryside, already offers more stars than the mind can hold. The change would be statistical, not experiential, but perhaps the distant smudges, those faint external galaxies you can sometimes see from a dark mountain, would be fewer. Perhaps the deep background would feel a bit more spacious. If a culture of observers looked outward and took their census, they might grow fond of the quiet, naming it the way we name our deserts and seas. The web invites parallels to our own patterns. Consider a forest with deer paths cutting through, to terra forest with deer paths cutting through, where many paths cross. Wildflowers are trampled, and the ground is bare. Elsewhere, mosses spread, and the canopy breathes. In the fabric of a city, too, the bright avenues hum while residential streets rest. We live inside webs, social, ecological, architectural, and we navigate their threads and hollows without thinking. To learn that the universe also arranges itself this way is to feel a kinship of form, a recognition that complexity often unfolds into networks with rooms. The Boötes Void, in this sense, is not a loner, but a citizen of the pattern. It stands beside filaments that angle toward well-known gatherings of galaxies, bright districts that act as borders and beacons. If we were to drift along one such filament and cross the threshold into the void, the traffic would thin. The lights would space out, the road would be the same, but the caravan would grow sparse until for long stretches we would drive alone, humming to ourselves and watching the sky. There's a lovely modesty in thinking of cosmic structure not as grand architecture imposed from above, but as a self arranged tapestry woven from small beginnings. Tiny unevenness at the start, amplified by time and gravity, gave rise to the lace. The same deep arithmetic that growth begets growth, that flows collect, that empty rooms make full rooms possible, appears in river deltas, in branching lungs, in the dendritic light of frost. We are not forcing the analogy. We are noticing a shared preference for paths and spaces, threads and hollows. As the night around you settles deeper, you might feel this web in your own body, the branching of nerves, the gentle network of capillaries, the rhythm of inhale and exhale tracing its own corridor through the chest. Rest is a kind of void we willingly enter, a soft interior room where fewer signals crowd the door, where the corridor is quiet enough for repair to begin. The Boötes Void, folded into the map of everything, becomes a symbol of that sanctuary, not by magic, but by the friendly way patterns rhyme across scales. In time, we will talk about how sensitive surveys refine these maps, how algorithms learn to trace the edges with more grace, how the counts of small, dim galaxies adjust what we think we know, but we needn't rush. Tonight, it's enough to hold the picture, a glowing lattice suspended in the dark, and a broad chamber within it, where the lattice thins, not a hole, not a flaw, but a breath. Let that image linger as the room grows still. Threads and hollows, lights, and the space between. The Boötes Void is one of the hollows, large, patient, and instructive. It teaches by being, by setting a gentle example of how absence supports presence, how quiet defines song, how the great web becomes legible, not only where it shines, but also where it lets the night be itself. There is a special quiet that comes with measuring the immeasurable, a kind of patience that accepts comparison as our friend. To approach the size of the Boötes void without startling the senses, we begin with small familiar anchors and let them carry us outward with gentleness. Picture a single second, the tiny warmth of a heartbeat between beats. Now stretch that second into the speed limit of light, how far a beam travels while you counted one. In that blink's journey, light would cross your room, touch the far wall, and lay a luminous fingertip there. A light year is simply a collection of those seconds, stacked into distance, how far light goes in 1 year of steady running. It's not a measure meant for feet or miles. It's a lullaby's measure, a way of letting time and space share the same breath. Galaxies sit far enough apart that miles give up. We borrow light years, then tens of thousands, then millions. Beyond that, astronomers lean on the megaparsec, a mouthful that means about 3.26 million light years gathered into one quiet unit. A parsec itself is a geometry trick whispered by starlight. A megaparsec is 1 million of those whispers bundled together. When we say that a structure spans dozens of megaparsecs, we are saying the distances soften into numbers that need the sky to hold them. So, how big is big here in the direction of Boötes? You might imagine an empty bowl whose diameter could cradle many superclusters end to end, whose rim brushes filaments like a slow turning tide. If the Milky Way were a grain of salt, as we played earlier, the Boötes Void would be a countryside fields beyond fields. If our entire local group of galaxies were a small coin tucked into your palm, the void would be a dark lake stretching past the horizon. But this lake does not have a perfect shore. When we sketch its outline, our pencil always hesitates. The true edge is feathery, a gradient rather than a wall. Some ways of drawing would carve the bowl round and smooth. Others would admit its shape is pinched here, swollen there, tugged by neighboring ridges of brightness, like a soft balloon pressed among stones. This is the nature of cosmic geography. Each map is a careful simplification. The land itself is more subtle. We can make the scale a little friendlier with travel metaphors that keep their shoes on the ground. Suppose a starship could coast near light speed without complaint. Crossing the emptier midlands of Boötes would still be a long, patient voyage, lifetime upon lifetime, the kind of journey whose logbook would be passed down like an heirloom. The spaces between the few galaxies inside would feel like quiet highways at night, the next exit announced in centuries rather than minutes. Big here is not a cliff but a meadow whose grasses run on and on, waving in a wind the traveler begins to love for its constancy. There are other large rooms in the universe, voids of comparable breadth and character, and there are towering structures too, like great walls and knots, where filaments meet in brilliant complication. Big changes temperament depending on companionship. A wall is big in the way a mountain range is big. A void is big in the way open ocean is big. One offers altitude, edges, horizons that crowd close. The other offers breadth, low and steady, horizon melting into horizon. It helps to remember that the numbers we whisper, distances, diameters, are lanterns held up in fog. Their light is real, but it diffuses. We depend on a cosmic expansion rate to translate redshift into miles of night, and the exact value we use is a living conversation. We depend on survey depths, on how faint a galaxy can be and still be counted. Each modest uncertainty wraps around our estimate like a shawl. We do not shiver. We simply keep the shawl on, acknowledging that bigness here is bracketed by good faith. And still the intuition holds. The Boötes Void belongs to the class of things so roomy that the mind relaxes rather than tightens when it imagines them. In a crowded city, we thread our steps, attentive and narrow. In a large field, we soften, shoulders widening with the sky. The void is such a field at cosmic scale. Its vastness is spacious rather than sharp, an invitation rather than a challenge. If you need a handhold at bedtime scale, try this on a cloudless summer night. The Milky Way's band stretches from one edge of the sky to the other. Our galaxy is roughly 100,000 light years across, give or take, because even galaxies prefer a soft outline. Now set that band aside and consider a span thousands of times greater, not 100,000 light years, but hundreds of millions, where our galaxy's thickness is a silk ribbon. The Boötes span is a wide river whose far bank you can't see. The river is not empty of stones and eddies, only less populated than the lands it divides. Why does this size matter? Because in the slow sculpture of the universe, scale carries story. Small scales tell of star birth and planetary weather, of dust warmed into chemistry. Intermediate scales speak of galaxy encounters, of mergers and tidal tales. The grand scales, those that sketch voids and walls, reveal the earliest conditions laid out like seeds, their growth encouraged by gravity across billions of years. To hold the size of Boötes in mind is to feel, faintly, the touch of the young universe still present in the shape of the old. Let the numbers dim now, like a clock face turning away. Keep the feeling, a room so large that you can walk and never reach the far wallpaper, yet a room that remains gentle, containing, and calm. This is big tonight, not a height that makes the stomach drop, but a breath that lets the breath lengthen. In that breath, sleep finds more room to settle, and we continue, unhurried, toward the few lanterns that burn within. We glide inward, adjusting our eyes to a darkness that is textured rather than blank. The Boötes Void, for all its sparseness, keeps companions galaxies that dwell like homesteads on a long prairie. They do not cluster close, yet they persist, each with its own small weather, its own quiet history, unfolding at the pace stars prefer. What might such residence be like? Our best sense suggests a familiar variety. Some are spirals, slow pinwheels of starlight and dust, their arms salted with newborn blue. Some are ellipticals, round and hushed, their stars older, their gas stores meager. A few are irregulars, shaped by past encounters or by the unevenness of their growth. Across cosmic neighborhoods, these forms repeat because the rules that mold them are patient and universal. Even in a low density district, gravity folds gas into clouds. Clouds ignite, and stars begin to keep their steady appointments. Isolation, though, writes a particular cadence. In crowded quarters, rich clusters, and busy filaments, galaxies jostle, tugging tides from each other, stripping gas in close passes, kindling starbursts as they merge. In the wide spaces, the dance is slower. A void dwelling galaxy may go long stretches without a significant partner to perturb it. Gas it gathers might arrive along thin filaments like narrow streams rather than roaring rivers. Star formation could proceed more gently, pulsing rather than raging, guided more by internal weather than by crowded traffic. To an observer living within one of these lanterns, the sky would offer reassurance, a local swath of stars, a pale band, if the home galaxy has the grace of a disk. The deep background might carry fewer neighboring smudges, those faint island universes we sometimes glimpse from Earth's darkest ridges. There would be no sense of lacking. How could there be when the nearby world is already luminous? Emptiness is a comparison, not a feeling that arises unbidden. The porch light of home makes its own company. Occasionally, a visitor passes through, a small group of galaxies threading the void along one of its barely traced paths. Their approach would be a slow, centuries long change in the patterns of the deep sky, a story only generations could follow. Encounters are rarer here, but not forbidden. Even in open country, roads cross. When they do, the familiar scripts unfold tidal arms, crumpled gas, newborn clusters glittering in the aftermath. Then the calm resumes, like ripples smoothing on a pond. The spare population teaches, too. In regions with few objects, each object is precious to our understanding. We count them more carefully, listen more closely to their light, weigh their motions against the tug of the surrounding hollows. Do they drift outward, feeling the gentle push of the underdensity's expansion? Do their shapes bear the signature of long solitude, or do we find traces of an older, busier past now far behind them? Answers arrive softly, shy of certainty, but even the questions lend contour to the quiet. Selection plays its quiet tricks here. The faintest galaxies, small and tired, are harder to see at great distance. Low surface brightness can hide like a gray moth against dusk. As our instruments learn to catch dimmer glows, the census within the void grows. What looked like pure emptiness becomes peppered, still sparse but pleasantly more populated than we first realized. This is the way of discovery, not a flip from nothing to something, but a deepening of the threshold where there begins. There is a tenderness in the metaphor of the rural, a farmhouse light across a field, a town of a few streets with a cafe that remembers names. In such places, time has a longer stride. People notice weather, the stars, when clouds allow, draw attention without needing to shout. Void galaxies may be the universe's country folk, self contained, steady, less likely to be swept up in grand city dramas, more likely to carry on with their own rhythms. The comparison is not perfect, but it offers a humane image to hold as we drift through the wide lanes. We could step into one of these galaxies in our minds and walk its starlit avenues. A spiral's arm would be a boulevard dusted with nebulae where young stars blush the gas pink. An elliptical's core would be a quiet square, bright but subdued, its old stars like warm windows at evening. In both, planets may wheel, atmospheres may weather, life may consider the same night we are considering now, without ever suspecting that their address lies in a district others call underdense. The word would mean little to them. The sky would be enough. And yet, for us watching from the edge, their very presence carries a lesson. The universe does not hoard light in only one kind of place. It sprinkles it generously, even into the wide rooms. The Boötes Void is not a veto against galaxies. It is a softened canvas with fewer strokes. The brush still moves. The paint still dries into shapes. Future maps, when they arrive, will continue to embroider this canvas with a few more points. Deeper surveys will add dim companions, reveal thin threads where we thought there was only air. We will update our sketches and, with a small smile, admit that our earlier outline was too tidy, but the character will endure a broad space with a low density of lights, a gentle district that makes the bright city walls around it look busier by contrast. Let yourself feel the comfort in that constancy. Even as details adjust, the mood remains almost empty, not alone. It is a phrase that could describe a quiet room at night, your own just now, where one lamp is enough and the house breathes. A few objects in their places, space between them generous and kind. In such rooms, we rest better. In such regions, perhaps, galaxies rest too, turning slowly, maintaining their weather, keeping commitments to their stars. As we leave this chapter, imagine a lantern set on a porch at the center of a very large, very quiet valley. From that porch, you can see the silhouettes of far hills, the suggestion of nearer paths, occasionally a distant rider's light moving along a ridge. You are not crowded. You are not abandoned. You are held by spaciousness. That is the Boötes Void secret, that scarcity can feel like peace, and that peace, at cosmic scale, has galaxies in it, each one a hearth, each one a promise that even the quietest rooms have stories warming within. We arrive now at a gentle laboratory, not a room of benches and glassware, but a wide lowland of the universe where density softens and motion becomes eloquent. The Boötes Void is such a place. Here, the physics that guides everything, Gravity, expansion, the slow conversation between matter seen and unseen, speaks in whispers we can still understand. Begin with the simplest partner in this duet, gravity. In crowded regions, gravity's voice is loud. Galaxies tug one another into embraces and collisions. Clusters bind with temperature and light. In the lowlands, gravity sighs rather than sings. The underdensity acts like a bowl turned upside down, a gentle hill from which matter tends to roll away. Over billions of years, tiny drifts become measurable tendencies. Galaxies near the void slopes pick up an outward nudge, a small steady addition to the universal expansion, as if a breeze were helping them along a path they were already walking. We call these extra motions peculiar velocities, and they hold stories. Picture a leaf on a slow river. The river itself carries everything downstream, that is the expansion of space. But the leaf also swirls around stones and slides along eddies. Those are peculiar motions, small local deviations, the everyday weather upon the larger wind. In the vicinity of a void, the pattern of those swirls changes. The leaf prefers the channel's edges. By watching many leaves for a long time, we learn the river's hidden shape. Voids, then, are not emptiness to be ignored. They are instruments. Their size and depth, the crispness or softness of their borders, the way they cluster together like airy cells in bread, these features respond to the ingredients of the universe. Dark matter's quiet scaffold, dark energy's patient push, the sum of ordinary matter folded into stars and gas all bend the void's biographies. When we measure void statistics, sizes, shapes, alignments, we are, in a modest way, touching the parameters of the cosmos with our fingertips. There is a delicate experiment that voids allow. Imagine placing a ruler across the sky that marks a preferred scale imprinted when the universe was young, a faint ring in the distribution of galaxies, a memory of sound waves traveling through hot plasma before the first atoms formed. Astronomers call this ring the acoustic scale, a standard candle for distance, only it is a standard pattern. Inside and around voids, that pattern may be easier to pick out, like ripples on a still pond instead of a choppy sea. By reading it carefully, we refine our sense of how quickly space has been stretching through time. Another gift the lowlands offer is clarity. Dense regions complicate light. Gas is hot, motions are messy, lensing bends paths into crowded tangles. In voids, the optical clutter fades. Light crossing their interiors travels with fewer detours. This opens gentle tests. Is the dimming we see consistent with our expectations for the universe's content? Do background galaxies appear, on average slightly smaller or larger, because of subtle lensing by the void's mass deficit? Even tiny effects, repeated across many hollows, confirm our grasp on the invisible scaffolding. Dark energy, that patient driver of accelerated expansion, leaves its fingerprint here as well. If space is speeding its own growth, the growth of contrast between dense and empty regions is affected. The void's breathing, their outward relaxation, traces this influence. Compare the void population across different cosmic times, and you might hear that breath deepen. The story we tell is cautious, but hopeful that the softest rooms in the universe can help us hear its deepest rhythm. It is tempting in such talk to turn equations into incantations. We resist the impulse and lean into images instead. Think of rising bread. Tiny pockets of gas expand as the dough warms, pushing the crumb into a network of airy cells. The final loaf depends on ingredients and timing: more yeast, warmer oven, different flour. In the cosmic loaf, gravity and expansion are the yeast and heat, matter and energy are the flour and water, voids are the airy cells, each one a letter in the recipe's written outcome. By counting them, by weighing their sizes, by noting how they touch, we read the recipe backwards. Simulations help us practice this reading. On supercomputers, we let a young universe evolve according to chosen rules, then compare its grown web to the one our telescopes map. When the patterns rhyme, our confidence rises. When they clash, we learn the Boötes region, with its generous calm, becomes a reference page, a large font paragraph in the book of comparison, its scale and character placed beside a simulation's output, either harmonize or ask for revision. And yet, even as we press meaning from the lowlands, we keep our tones soft. The universe changes us more than we change it. Each careful conclusion carries qualifiers like cushions, instrumental limits, sample sizes, the algorithms that define a void's edge. But cushions do not erase furniture. They make it comfortable to sit with. The core insight holds the sparse places matter, not in spite of their sparseness, but because of it. If you like, feel the physics in your body. The slow outward tide of the void is like the relaxing exhale that follows a held breath. Peculiar velocities are the small adjustments you make when you settle into bed, the shoulder rolled an inch, the knee eased, tiny motions that bring alignment. Dark energy's steady encouragement resembles the deep background sense that time carries us forward, whether we lean or resist. The body understands metaphors long before the mind names them. In this chapter's hush, let the Boötes Void graduate from scenery to teacher. It teaches us to hear motion in what looks still, to infer structure from absence, to value the lowlands as places where the great forces simplify just enough to be legible. When we rest, we seek quiet to feel more clearly. The universe, on its vaster canvas, suggests the same: in quiet, clarity; in lowlands, lawfulness; in the big room, a chance to listen. Set that lesson beside your pillow. The equations can sleep in the desk drawer tonight. Keep only the feeling that even emptiness is active, that even the softest rooms have currents, and that by noticing them, we come to know the house more truly. The Boötes Void breathes out, and we drift with it, a little lighter, a little farther along the long, luminous road. Cartography is an act of trust. You press ink to paper to represent places you cannot hold in your hand. When the subject is a quiet hollow in the sky, the trust grows even gentler. We are mapping not peaks but pauses, not the lights but the spaces between them. The earliest maps of the cosmic web were like etchings, thin lines, sparse points, a suggestion more than a portrait. A telescope gathered a galaxy's spectrum. A redshift turned that spectrum into a distance. A plot marked the point. Repeat this for thousands, then millions, and a relief map emerges. Filaments brighten, walls stand up, voids darken into legible rooms. We learn to see absences by first seeing a great many presences. Two kinds of sight work together: photometric and spectroscopic. Photometry is the quick glance. The colors and brightness of a galaxy hint at its distance. It is efficient and wide, like surveying a landscape from a hill. Spectroscopy is the careful measure, the ruler on the workbench. Split the light, find the fingerprints, Measure the shift. It is slower, narrower. Sure, in practice, the first guides the second. Broad photometric catalogs propose the terrain. Spectroscopic follow ups carve it into relief. The Boötes Void came into focus through this patient handshake. But how do you draw an edge around something that is defined by less? Algorithms become our pencil grips. Some carve space into small cells, counting galaxies in each and shading the underfilled. Others search for spheres that can be expanded until they just touch enough lights, like blowing bubbles between pebbles. Still others trace the skeleton of filaments and name the spaces they enclose. Each method has a temperament. Some prefer roundness, some honor the knobbly truth, and together they grant us a family of outlines rather than a single verdict. The texture of surveys matters. Depth is one kind of texture, how faint a galaxy must be before it disappears from the catalog. Another is completeness. Did we miss some for reasons that have nothing to do with the universe and everything to do with weather, instrumentation, or the sheer logistics of time? A third is color bias. Certain surveys favor galaxies with active star formation, others catch the redder, older ones better. All bias is not failure. It is a lens you learn to account for. When we correct carefully, the map's emptiness becomes truer. Sometimes, what looked like a yawning hole shrinks when we look harder. New dots appear, a string of dwarfs, a hidden thread of low surface brightness ghosts, and the dark bleaches a shade lighter. The character remains, but the contour softens. This is not embarrassment, it is progress. The night is generous with subtleties, and our eyes, human and mechanical, learn. Light is not the only tracer. Hydrogen gas whispers at radio wavelengths, emitting a modest line that reveals its presence even when stars are few. By listening with radio dishes, we can spot galaxies too shy to shine brightly in starlight. Sometimes these quiet reservoirs sketch paths through voids where optical maps were nearly empty. In other cases, they simply add texture, the difference between blank and lightly stippled paper. Gravitational lensing adds another, subtler pencil. Mass bends light. Less mass bends it less. By statistically comparing the shapes and sizes of many background galaxies, we can infer the invisible density in the foreground, the dark matter that does the bending. Where a void stretches, the lensing signature changes delicately. Measure enough galaxies, and the change resolves into a map of what isn't there. It is cartography by negative space, like sensing the shape of a bowl by the way water hesitates at its rim. Distance, too, is a kind of light. Supernovae stellar endings that flare with known brightness can be used as mileposts. Their distribution relative to voids helps tie our charts to a trusted scale. If expansion is faster or slower than we thought, the hollows might seem larger or smaller than our earlier estimate. Cross checks like these don't scold, they soothe. They remind us that many instruments played together make the song true. If you enjoy the tactile, imagine the map as a relief woodcut under your fingers. Filaments are raised grain. Clusters are knots polished by many hands. Voids are the smooth, low fields between. As surveys improved, the carving deepened. We went from sketches to bas reliefs to sculptures you could almost walk around. Today's atlases are not final statues. They are works in progress, beloved for their fidelity and their flaws, replaced, refined, and remembered in turn. In all this, Humility is our compass. The Boötes Void we draw is not a single unarguable circle. It is a consensus shaded with uncertainty and agreed upon hollowness that proves robust across many ways of seeing. When disagreements arise, a method that calls the border too far, another that calls it too near, we read the differences like contour lines, learning the land's slope rather than insisting on a cliff. The human parallel is simple. We also map the invisible in our lives. We draw boundaries around seasons of quiet. We name rooms in our days where nothing much happens, and yet everything restores. Others might draw those borders differently. That's all right. What matters is that the space exists and can be returned to. The Boötes Void is one of the universe's returnable spaces. Our instruments find it, our models expect it, our minds, once introduced, keep it as a calm address. As the chapter closes, you can picture a wall sized star atlas in a dim observatory, its dots and arcs glimmering faintly in red light. A hand reaches up and traces a soft oval where the points thin near Boötes. Not a perfect oval, just enough to guide the eye. Here, the hand says without speaking, this is one of the quiet rooms. The room you are in now answers with its own hush, and for a moment the two maps, cosmic and personal, overlap. The result is rest. Edges are comforting in books and teacups, a line you can run a finger along, a rim that says, here it ends. The universe, generous and a little mischievous, prefers gradients. The Bodhi's void keeps this preference. If you ask for its border, it offers you a soft fade rather than a fence. Imagine walking from meadow into forest at dusk. There isn't a gate. First, a single tree stands apart, then a cluster of trunks, then understory and leaf duff, and the hush particular to woods. You crossed a threshold you could feel, yet you would be hard pressed to mark the exact footstep where field yielded to grove. The edge of Boötes is like that, readable as a change in tempo. Galaxies begin to appear more often. Faint threads thicken into filaments. Neighboring superclusters take on the presence of distant hills. Our maps draw helpful ovals, spheres, soft polygons. They are true enough to guide, false enough to remind us they're drawings. A spherical void is a kindness to our geometry, not a claim about reality. Press on that sphere, and it dims into an ellipsoid. Tug at one side with a nearby wall of galaxies, and it dents. The true boundary breathes with the company it keeps. Stand in your mind near that boundary. On one side, the star cities thin to hamlets. On the other, the highway lights gather. It is not a cliffside view, no sudden plunge, no roaring surf. It is a slope. The quiet eases into murmur, the murmur into conversation. If you waited long enough, you could measure the change the way one might record birdsong increasing as spring advances, numbers rising softly, then surely. Edges that aren't rigid have a gift, they connect. A wall would separate, a gradient converses. Matter flows along such conversations. Gas and dark matter slip from the lowlands toward the ridges, obliging gravity's patience, and in doing so, they knit the lace. The border becomes less a line and more a seam, stitched by time and motion into the fabric of the cosmic web. When we name the neighbors, bright districts that help define Boötes' hush, we are conducting a kind of astronomy that resembles learning towns around a countryside. There is the market square over that ridge, the river road farther east, the crossroads with the cafe. The void's character is partly its own, partly a reflection of these neighbors' nearness. Their presence explains its hush, the way busy streets explain a quiet side lane. If you listen closely, you may hear a human echo. In our lives, edges are rarely hard. We talk about burnout, yet the crossing into it is a hallway, not a trap door. We speak of recovering, and that too is a gradient, day by day, light by light. Even joy arrives in gradations, a morning that grows brighter, minute by minute, worries loosening as the sun spreads across a table. The universe's borders counsel patience with our own. Change is usually soft edged. That softness is not weakness, it is grace. We sometimes long for absolute lines, here and there, in and out, but the long practice of looking at the sky encourages us to love the in between. The Boötes edge is a study in that love. It refuses to sharpen beyond a point, not to frustrate us, but to keep truth whole. Reality at scale prefers brushstrokes to pixels. Let that be a comfort as the night deepens. You do not need a crisp perimeter around your rest. Let wakefulness thin into drowsing, drowsing into sleep, like a sparsely lit road joining a busier one. The crossing will happen without a gatekeeper, without a horn. The only sign will be the ease with which your thoughts begin to space themselves, the way galaxies space themselves less and less as we leave the void and join the weave. And when you picture the Boötes border again, see it as a shoreline at low tide, wet sand becoming dry, ripples smoothing, the faint shine yielding to matte. The ocean is still the ocean, the land still land, but the line between them is a conversation. It moves, it breathes, it welcomes your bare feet to step across without hurry. The way this chapter invites you to step from quiet into gentle company and back again, learning that the world is most itself where it blends. There's a feeling we recognize in wide places, a slow exhale at the edge of a prairie, a lake's long hush holding the sky on its back. Even an uncluttered room, swept and morning cool, can make the nervous system loosen its grip. Vastness, outer or inner, tends to turn the volume down. When we hear of the Boötes Void, we might imagine loneliness. The word void seems to ask for it, but the more faithfully we describe the place, sparse, not empty, hushed, not hollow, the more it resembles the quiet we seek rather than the isolation we fear. It suggests a psychological spaciousness, a permission to be less crowded by the immediate, an invitation to see pattern in the long rhythm rather than the quick beat. The mind, busy as it is, also loves edges softened by distance. On a mountain trail, a vista simplifies the terrain. Hills collapse into gentle layers, trees become texture, rivers a single silver sentence. The complexity hasn't vanished. It has stepped back far enough to harmonize. Voids perform that service for thought. They make room for overview. They let events breathe between themselves. In that breathing, we find a kind of kindness we can extend inward. Consider attention as a constellation. In the daytime, many points clamor to be stars, notifications, tasks, obligations with bright, insistent flares. At night, the constellation thins, with fewer points, patterns emerge we could not see in the daytime crowd. The Boötes Void is a celestial metaphor for that thinning, fewer distractions, deeper seeing. We sometimes call this sense O, and studies suggest it changes our posture toward the world, loosening self centeredness, lengthening patience, increasing the generosity with which we hold others' stories. Awe is often born of scale, tall trees, open skies, unbroken snow, but it can also arise from pattern, recognizing that even vast emptiness is part of a larger design. The void is not meaning's absence, it is meaning's breathing room. Close your eyes and imagine standing in a quiet museum gallery where a single painting hangs on a large white wall. The empty wall is not wasted space. It is a frame that lets the painting speak. The Boötes Void is such a wall in the cosmic gallery. The galaxies within, scattered, resilient, are granted clarity by the room around them. So, too, in our days, the pauses make the conversations audible, the margin makes the words legible. There is, of course, a limit. Too much emptiness can feel like drift. The comfort of vastness depends on an anchor, a porch light, a familiar star, a memory that says, "You belong here." The void provides anchors in its lantern galaxies and in the bright ridges around it. You tonight have your own, the weight of your blanket, the outline of the window, the quiet companionship of your breath. Anchored vastness becomes medicine. We might ask, gently, what the void teaches about being alone. Perhaps that solitude and loneliness are cousins, not twins. Solitude is emptiness chosen, a clearing where the mind can lay out its tools and work with unhurried hands. Loneliness is emptiness imposed, an absence where presence is desired. The Boötes Void, for all its size, feels more like solitude than loneliness. It is the universe choosing a broadness to balance its cities of light. If you try the thought experiment of living in a void galaxy, you might discover how personal vastness can be. Your nights would still glitter, your seasons would still pass, your town, however alien or familiar, would still make its bread and tell its stories. You might glance up on a crisp evening and sense a little more space between the distant smudges, and maybe that would translate subtly into a culture that values reflection, a music that favors long notes, an architecture that loves windows, or perhaps not at all. Either way, there would be enough. Back in our rooms, we can practice the psychology of vastness without leaving the pillow. Recognize the spaces in your day as essential structure, not wasted hours. Let a walk be a void carved into the city. Let a pause between words be a void carved into a conversation. Let sleep itself be a void carved into wakefulness, where the brain rinses and repairs, sorts and restores, so that meaning can return refreshed into the bright districts of morning. The Boötes Void has become, in our story, a metaphor with soft edges and warm hands. It suggests that the universe, at its most expansive, models a rhythm we can borrow, gather and release, cluster and clear, speak and rest. If your thoughts tonight have been crowded, imagine them stepping aside, making room for a few that truly matter to take gentle shape. And if your thoughts have been sparse already, let them remain so without judgment. A blank page is not a failure, it is an expectancy. Before you drift, picture again that wide, quiet bowl in space, not black, but subtly blue, pricked with a few steady lights. Feel how your chest mimics it, a bowl that fills and empties, fills and empties. There is no urgency in either motion. The edge is not a line, but a soft field you can cross without effort. The psychology of vastness is not a trick. It is simply the body recognizing and relaxing into the scale it secretly understands, large enough to hold everything, simple enough to carry you toward rest. The chapter closes the way a window closes at night, without finality, just a gentle click and the sense of a room made safe. Beyond the glass, The sky remains open and kind. Within you have room. The Boötes Void hums somewhere far away, and the hum resembles calm. There is a soft grammar tonight, a way in which light arranges time into sentences long enough to hold galaxies. When we look outward, we do not see things as they are, but as they were, light carrying messages at a patient pace, arriving with the dust of years on its envelope. In the direction of Botes, that grammar becomes legible in the very spacing of its words. Time, then, is not something separate from distance. It rides inside it. When we say the void spans hundreds of millions of light years, we are also saying that the far rim's present cannot reach us yet. We see its earlier face, the way an old photograph holds a smile of someone who has since become older, kinder, perhaps quieter. The light is true, but it is truth with a timestamp. Consider a star as a storyteller. It speaks continuously, every instant sending a version of itself outward. Those photons cross rooms of space we cannot imagine with ordinary measures. Some are absorbed, some scatter, some slip past worlds that would have loved to notice them. A few line up with our pupil, and for a heartbeat, they belong to us. The story they tell is always about then. Even the moon's light arrives with a pause, barely a breath of delay. For distant galaxies, the pause stretches into millions, hundreds of millions of years. The Boötes Void is a chamber where such pauses lengthen into paragraphs. If we linger with this idea, light as memory, we begin to feel why emptiness has a kind of tenderness. In busy sections of the web, memories overlap like voices in a cafe, lively and tangled. In the void, the voices are fewer, and each carries farther. A single supernova's afterglow might travel unbothered for ages, a solitary letter that eventually reaches some future eye and changes how a map is drawn. The scarcity of sources makes each source luminous in a new way. This timestamping is not a nuisance. It is a gift. It lets the universe be a museum without closing hours. We can walk its galleries and see different epochs hanging side by side, the near and the far arranged into a chronology that folds back on itself like silk. The bright ridges bordering Boötes display one era, the scant lanterns within show another. Together they teach us not only where matter has gathered, but when the gathering took place. Our instruments, those patient listeners, become archivists of ancient correspondence. Spectrographs read not just a galaxy's redshift, but the maturity of its stars, the metals they have forged, the dust they have breathed. X ray eyes catch the hot sigh of gas in crowded regions. Radio ears hear hydrogen whispering its lonely line in quieter halls. Each wavelength is a different kind of memory, a different shelf in the library. The Bodhi's shelves are less crowded, but their books are no less eloquent. It is possible to feel this at human scale. Think of a quiet afternoon when only one thing happens: rain tapping steadily, or a kettle coming slowly to song. You remember that hour more clearly than a tumble of errands. In the same way, a void can sharpen recall. The light that crosses it meets fewer interruptions, and when it arrives, it sketches clean lines. We learn to read those lines like hand drawn maps, imperfect, yes, but heartfelt and often right where it matters. How then do we hold the Boötes void in this moving frame? As a long pause in the universe's speech, but a pause filled with meaning. The light we receive from the few galaxies inside tells of long stretches without crowded neighbors, of star formation that may have breathed rather than burned, of histories unfolded at an unhurried tempo. Beyond the rim, the brighter districts send a different tale, one of traffic and tug, of gas shocked and heated, of gravity's pressures finding quick expression. Distance as time also lends compassion to astronomy. To say a galaxy is a certain shape is to accept that we meet it as it was. Perhaps it has since merged, or brightened, or quieted. Perhaps it has bloomed anew after a long dark winter. We carry that humility into our sentences. It appears, it suggests, it likely. These are not hedges of fear. They are courtesies to the unseen present. To read both tales at once is to appreciate contrast. Music depends on rests as much as on notes. Poetry arranges words with spaces that do their own quiet work. In a similar spirit, the map of everything depends on rooms where light takes its time and carries its memories with less interference. The Boötes Void is one such room, a conservatory with generous silence, where a single instrument can be heard across the hall. Light keeps coming. The universe keeps sending. We are always a little late, and always precisely on time. In that paradox lie both science and rest. The Boötes Void does not rush us, it stretches the sentence so we can hear the vowels, feel the breath, and perhaps finally understand what quiet has been trying to say. There is a gentle practice you can borrow from this. When a thought arrives tonight, treat it as a photon with a long journey behind it. It tells you not only about the content it carries, but about the path it took, the day's moods, the week's weather, the years that shaped your ways of noticing. Receive it kindly, the way a good observer receives a distant smudge of light, with curiosity and patience, without forcing it to be brighter than it is. Let it finish its message. Then, if it wishes, let it go on. As you settle deeper, imagine those slow couriers of light still crossing the wide hall, dusted with ages, unafraid of distance. They will arrive when they do. Meanwhile, your room offers nearer light, soft and present, asking nothing more than that you close your eyes and let time for a while be simply the distance between one easy breath and the next. Let us walk the perimeter, not with boots and compass, but with a drifting gaze, as if we were a small lantern gliding just above the floor of a vast, dim amphitheater. The Boötes Void, for all its interior hush, has a lively rim. Along it, filaments gather like roads at the edge of a plain, and superclusters rise like ranges a little way off, their summits pricked with city lights of galaxies. We begin with the sensation of approach. Inside the void, the air, if there were air, would feel cool and open. As we drift outward, points of light multiply in our field. A solitary spiral gives way to a pair, then a string, then a beaded thread with rhythm in its spacing. Threads cross and thicken. Here and there, knots glow with the crowded warmth of clusters. The change isn't abrupt, it's a slow crescendo, the way birdsong grows as you near a grove in spring. Each filament has a personality. Some are straight and taut, as if tensioned between distant anchors. Others meander, swollen in places where smaller streams have merged, narrow where the land resists. The galaxies along them behave like towns on a river, facing the flow, exchanging goods, occasionally rafting together in mergers that leave behind the debris of tidal tails like colorful drifting leaves. Gas, funneled by gravity's invisible banks, arrives along these courses and feeds the star forming neighborhoods. Where several such filaments meet, the rim grows mountainous. Soapens is spin through deep wells of gravity, lined with hundreds or thousands of galaxies, their central areas often occupied by giant ellipticals, old and bright. Hot gas suffuses these hubs, shining in high energies, like a city seen in infrared. The lensing is stronger here, subtly warping the images of background galaxies into stretched arcs, a quiet testimony that mass, whether luminous or dark, is abundant. From these hubs, the filaments radiate like spokes, some angling back toward our void's edge, some outbound to other hollows, other planes. If we continue our tour, we notice that the rim is not a single ridge, but a braided coast. In some sectors, the transition is broad, a wide delta of galaxies that slowly densifies. In others, a sharper shelf separates the lowlands from a bright plateau. These differences owe their shape to ancient conditions, the ripples in the early universe that have since been amplified, and to the long local negotiations of gravity and expansion. No two borders are the same. Each quadrant of the rim carries its own handwriting. From the rim, looking back inward is like standing at the edge of a plateau at dusk and gazing out over a valley whose floor has already taken on evening. The interior is not black, it is blue and soft, scattered with a few steady lamps. Looking outward toward the crowded web is like turning toward a city from a quiet hill. The sky glows slightly with accumulated windows. You can almost hear the hum. Traveling along the boundary, we pass junctions where thin tributaries slip into the void. These are the modest corridors by which its residents are supplied, routes along which small groups of galaxies can meander in, bringing with them fresh gas, new stories, occasional mischief. Without such corridors, the interior would be even quieter. With them, it remains connected, like a rural community served by a few well kept roads. There is value in simply noticing the rim's variety. It keeps us honest about the word void, which tempts the mind into seeing a circle on a map and mistaking it for a real clean edge. The universe, in its patient complexity, offers instead a quilt of seams, overlapping, stitched, handmade by time. Our tour teaches us to trade rigidity for reverence, to let the land tell us how to draw it. The rim is also a teacher of dynamics. Watch long enough, longer than any one life, but not longer than light remembers, and you would see matter flowing. Galaxies are not fixed. They drift along the filaments like boats on slow currents. Some peel off toward the clusters, where life will be noisier, ram pressure stripping gas from spirals, encounters kindling starbursts, black holes at centers feeding on inflows and announcing their meals with jets. Others skirt the edge and continue past, untempted by hubbub, toward distant districts of the web. Even the void participates. Its interior, less massive, exerts a negative pressure of sorts on the rim, a lac that gently tugs. This changes orbits subtly, skews the balance of inflow and outflow, writes a faint signature in the way galaxies on the boundary move. Detecting that signature is like reading wind by the dance of grasses, indirect, beautiful, and when you learn the language, quite precise. Our tour, for all its cosmic scale, is familiar. Cities do this. Forests do this. Coastlines do this. There is always an edge where patterns mingle, where the quiet negotiates with the busy. Stand there long enough, and you'll learn both dialects. The Boötes rim is fluent in each. The hush of the interior, the murmur of the weave, and its fluency is what makes it a place of learning. Before we finish the circuit, let's grant ourselves one human stop, a lookout. Sit on the low stone wall in your mind and look back across what you've walked. The lights inside the void are few and generous. The strands beyond are many and patient. The seam between them is not a hard border, but a long embrace. You are allowed to love both, the open plain and the braided road, the lantern in the window and the skyline. When we rise and go on, the lantern we carry feels steadier. The rim's lesson travels with us into ordinary life, that thresholds can be beautiful, that variety at the boundary is a sign of health, that connection does not need to be crowded to be real. The rest of the universe continues its unhurried work, and we just now can close our eyes and let the afterimage of that braided coast settle behind the lids like a soft shoreline, one we can return to whenever we need a place to stand between worlds and feel both calmly at once. There is a tenderness in looking for things that almost do not wish to be found. Shy glows at the edge of sight, galaxies that prefer dusk to noon. The Boötes Void, for all its wideness, keeps such secrets. To know it better, we lean toward the faintest lanterns. Imagine a sheet of dark paper pricked by a few clear holes. Now imagine, nearer the margins of those holes, a dusting of pin scratches, so fine you only see them when you tilt the paper just so. Low surface brightness galaxies feel like those scratches, spread out light, generous but gentle, refusing to clump into easy, eye catching knots. They can be big as counties and yet glow like fireflies dispersed across a meadow. In crowded regions, they hide among brighter neighbors. In the void, they hide in plain sight, diluted by distance and the softness of their own radiance. To meet them, we borrow different ears. Optical eyes begin the conversation, long exposures, careful subtraction of sky, patience with gradients. But radio ears often close the distance. Neutral hydrogen, ordinary and abundant, hums its narrow note, a whisper at a wavelength that slips through dust and indifference alike. A galaxy that barely writes its name in starlight can still sign the ledger with hydrogen's quiet pen. In surveys tuned to that pitch, faint, spread out systems step forward, and the void becomes less solitary than it seemed. Dwarf galaxies are another kind of lantern, small, earnest, often uneven. Some are puffballs with very few stars, like powder gathered by a winter wind along a fence. Others are scrappy, bright where a recent pocket of star birth has kindled, dim elsewhere, their shapes recalling the history of gusts and pauses that move their gas. In the void, dwarfs may evolve with fewer interruptions. No large neighbor strips their fuel in a rush. No tidal giant wrings them into new shapes. They write their story in slow cursive, shaping letters with the steadiness of decades rather than the haste of days. Every time we add such a lantern to the map, the character of Boötes changes a shade. Not a revelation that erases the quiet, but a stippling that adds texture. The hollowness remains, the mood endures. Yet the stories multiply, a faint spiral leisurely in its star-making, deep in the interior. A misty, diffuse system at the rim, fed by a thread so thin it barely deserves the name filament. A clutch of dwarfs traveling together like migrating birds, their line invisible, except for the small rhythm of their appearances along it. Detection is only the first kindness. The next is listening. What do these faint residents teach? They hint that galaxy formation is a permissive craft. Give gas a chance, and gravity a long summer afternoon, and stars will appear. They hint that environment tones the outcome without dictating it. Crowded webs make bold strokes. Quiet rooms allow small handwriting. They hint that there are many ways to be a galaxy, many ways to keep company with night. Their chemistry tells time. Metals, the heavier elements cooked in stars and spilled in stellar winds, accumulate as generations pass. A faint void galaxy with very few metals may be young in its star making, or simply careful, using fuel sparingly. Its oldest stars elderly but few. Another faint one, richer in metals than expected, might have a more complicated past, quiet now, but once a busier member of a caravan that drifted in along a filament, shedding and gathering as it moved. Each spectrum, even when weak, is an autobiography in miniature. There is a human comfort in this attention to the subtle. We are not only impressed by grand cathedrals of light, we are moved by porch bulbs and tea candles, by night lights in hallways that remember our steps. The faintest galaxies are like that, functional, tender, illuminating exactly enough for their own rooms. They remind us that not all value is bright. Some is consistent, some is soft, some is simply present when needed. In the act of seeking them, we also learn patience with ourselves. Our eyes, unaided, will miss them. Our first drafts will be wrong, background mistaken for foreground, a smudge demoted to noise when it was a shy world waving from far away. We learn to revise without shame, to look longer, to try a different wavelength, a different method, a different night. The Boötes Void rewards this humility, the way a lake rewards stillness. Only when the surface calms do the deep shapes appear. And when they appear, the void gains a new kind of warmth. The lanterns are few, but they are specific. Here is one with a crooked arm and a blue knot of newborn stars, the kind of blue you see in a robin's egg, left cool in shadow. There is one with a redder, older heart, its light seasoned, its gas low, content to spend its remaining fuel with care. Between them, a darkness that is not emptiness, but breathing space, the long pause that lets their quiet music be heard. As your room grows darker, you might honor your own faint lanterns, the small, steady habits that keep your nights kind. A glass of water on the table, a book turned face down like a sleeping bird, the familiar weight of a blanket. In a life crowded with bright obligations, these are the low surface brightness comforts, overlooked by daylight, essential in the hours when we listen more than we speak. The Boötes Void keeps its reputation, almost empty, not alone, but after meeting its shy residents, the phrase mellows, almost empty, and beautifully so, not alone, and never striving to be crowded. We are allowed to love the bright ridges and the timid glows, the cathedrals and the nightlights, the city and the porch. This balance, once seen, once felt, gently accompanies us towards sleep. Close your eyes and imagine a young universe as a bowl of cool, smooth batter. There are tiny unevennesses in it, imperfections so slight they look like texture rather than pattern. Now picture time as warmth, gravity as leaven, expansion as the bowl's slow breath. The batter rises, the texture becomes structure, ridges, chambers, airy rooms. What emerges is a loaf you can slice, Bright walls, quiet voids. To understand the recipe, we run the oven again, in miniature and in thought. We simulate, in vast digital kitchens, supercomputers, humming like beehives. We seed a box with those early unevennesses, guided by what the cosmos has whispered through relic light. We assign ingredients, dark matter, to give the mixture its backbone, ordinary matter to light the crust, dark energy to encourage the rise. Then we watch, not in real time, of course, but in computed jumps, the way you might study the opening of a flower through time lapse. The web appears, threads tighten, clusters thicken, hollows deepen, and somewhere, if our box is large enough and our recipe right, a room like Boötes will open. Simulating silence teaches by comparison. If the voids in our model are too small, too round, too timid, we suspect an ingredient is mismeasured. If they are too cavernous, the opposite worry arises. We tweak the expansion rate's history, rethink the mix of dark and luminous matter, recalibrate how gas cools and warms and yields stars. Each iteration is not an answer but a question refined, a way of asking the universe, did we hear you correctly? Some simulations add elaborate subplots, recipes for how galaxies flare, how supernovae stir their neighborhoods, how black holes at galactic centers feed and in feeding change the weather around them. These subplots affect the quiet rooms indirectly. Heat and winds from the busy districts can travel, however faintly, into the lowlands. Feedback, in both senses of the word, shapes the bread's crumb. Hidden heat can keep small galaxies from forming. A cool corner can allow a lantern to kindle. The void's final texture holds the memory of such whispers. There is a calm pleasure in how simulations make the intangible tactile. You can fly through them, camera set to drift, and watch a filament assemble like a river, drawing tributaries. You can pause at a void center and turn slowly, noting the spacing of the first lights at the rim, the way the horizon promises more. It is a constructed seeing, yes, but grounded in law, like reading a model of an ancient city to learn where its markets once must have been. You gain an intuition that maps back onto the real. Discrepancies are invitations. Perhaps our simulated voids align with those we map, but their populations of dwarfs and diffuse spirals differ. Perhaps the alignment improves only when we allow for gentler, more persistent heating of intergalactic gas, or when we grant dark matter a slightly different temperament. Each change is modest, and the answers are never single. Many recipes can bake a good loaf. We are after the one the universe used, or close enough to call it kin. The practice humbles and delights. We begin with equations that feel austere, and we end with landscapes that feel familiar. The voids in a successful simulation are not abstract holes, they are rooms with character. Some are tangled, cut by thin, reluctant filaments like paths through dry grass. Some are spacious and nearly round, as if time had polished their walls. Some have centers slightly offset from what your neat mind expected, reminding you that even in mathematics, real things prefer a little asymmetry. We also learn the tempo of change. Voids breathe over eons, their boundaries relaxing outward as the expansion leans into its long project. Filaments fatten, clusters eat and rest. Eat and rest. Place a bookmark at some early chapter and another at a later one, and the difference is gentle, cumulative. In sleep, bodies repair with a similar slowness. In forests, soil forms with comparable patience. The simulation's timescale is unfamiliar to our days, but not to our instincts. We trust processes that do not rush. Sometimes the greatest gift is confidence in our metaphors. Watching a void clear itself in a model makes meadow feel truer, lowland more apartment. Seeing filaments pull like waterways makes river an honest word. The images we've leaned on, foam, lace, coastlines, hold up under scrutiny, not as literal parallels, but as faithful rhythms. Rhythm is what the mind remembers. Rhythm is what stories keep. If your thoughts have grown technical, let them soften now. Imagine only that somewhere in a cool room, code is running like a slow nightly tide, and on its screen, a quiet forms a Boötes like bowl, widening pixel by pixel. No one is rushing it. No one is scolding the parts that don't match yet. The researcher, perhaps with a sweater around their shoulders, sips something warm and waits for the next frame. Outside, the city is dim. Inside, the universe is rehearsing its steps for us, so that when we dance our understanding across the real sky, we do so with surer feet. The lesson travels easily to the bedside. When you replay your day, you're running a small simulation adjusting ingredients, wondering which choices led to which textures, which empty hours allowed which ideas to rise. Be gentle in the edits. The loaf you'll bake tomorrow does not need a different universe, only a little attentiveness to warmth and time. The void within your schedule, the deliberate pause, is not lost productivity. It is structure forming, room making, pattern finding. The Boötes Void, imagined and modeled, mapped and metaphored, remains what it has always been, a generous space in the great design. Simulating it does not cage its wonder, it tunes our listening. We step back from the screen, turn off the light, and for a moment feel the correspondence between a code born hollow and the one outside, immense and real. Both invite the same response, a long breath, shoulders down, a willingness to let the night be wide. There is a hush that comes before dawn, when the world is still itself, but the light is already on its way. Astronomy often lives in that hush. Much of what we know is beautiful. Much of what we do not yet know is already approaching, quietly, with new instruments and slightly steadier hands. The Boötes Void waits in that same pre-dawn, a room whose corners we can almost see, and soon a little better. Think of the sky as a ledger we have been filling by lamplight. Early entries were careful and sparse, written with thick nibs. In recent decades, the pen has thinned, the ink has darkened, and what once looked like blank space now carries pale handwriting. The next set of eyes will widen the ledger again. Vast surveys, patient, repeating, night after night, will watch the same fields until faintness gives up its camouflage. In those stacked glances, shy galaxies gather enough light to lift above the noise, like moths revealed in the slow accumulation of moon. Some of these surveys will see in broad strokes, painting the sky with deep but gentle color. Others will thread spectra through those colors, like fine stitching, turning hints into distances, distances into maps. Space based observatories will float above the atmosphere's tremble, holding the view steady the way a quiet hand holds a teacup. Ground based mirrors will open like calm lakes, gathering starlight with the generosity of a valley collecting rain. Together, they will practice an art older than firelight storytelling, patient repetition that turns rumor into story. The void will gain new residence in our records, not because they were not there before, but because our eyes will have learned a new softness. Low surface brightness galaxies, the diffuse and the delicate, will step forward. Hydrogen's whisper will be taken more seriously by larger, more attentive radio ears. Even the thin, reluctant filaments that enter the void like footpaths through tall grass may resolve, one tentative step at a time, into lines we can follow without squinting. With better maps comes better listening to motion. The peculiar velocities along the void's rim, the small local breezes in the great outward wind, will be traced more finely. It may become easier to distinguish between the nudge of the underdensity and the side gusts from neighboring structures, like learning to tell valley wind from sea breeze by scent alone. In those motions live clues about the universe's expansion, about the scaffolding we cannot see, about the deep arithmetic that keeps four-dimensional time and three-dimensional space in quiet conversation. And we may gently, without bravado, revisit our definitions. What counts as a void when edges are soft? Which algorithms honor the land best? New methods will arrive with better manners, humbler in their assumptions, clearer about the stories they tell and the stories they cannot. Machine learning may help, not by replacing judgment, but by offering 1,000 careful comparisons we did not have time to make. The computer will suggest, and the sky will confirm, and our maps will learn the difference between confidence and certainty. There is a human chorus behind all this glass, night crews in thick sweaters, breath fogging in domes, engineers coaxing quiet from detectors that hear everything, including their own pulse, students learning the patience of calibration, the ritual of checking, the holy boredom of watching a screen until the one meaningful line appears. A culture of unhurried care. We trade sleep so that others, like you tonight, might find it easier, knowing that a universe mapped with kindness tends to soothe. Even the stories we tell will change shape as the data deepen. The Boötes Void may knit with its neighbors in ways we missed, its interior threaded by currents of gas whose slow, long drift matters more than we guessed. Or perhaps the opposite. Perhaps its heart will prove emptier than we imagined, a deeper blue within an already quiet blue. Neither outcome threatens the void's beauty, both enrich it. A room can be loved, whether it holds a single chair or several, whether its windows look on forest or field. On the horizon, too, are instruments that will trace not only where galaxies are, but how they lived. Star formation histories recovered from faint starlight, metallicities whispered by almost invisible lines, the flicker of intermittent black hole meals, the soft glow of dust warmed by quiet suns. With such biographies in hand, we will ask how a life in the lowlands differs from a life on the ridge. Do void galaxies age more gracefully, wrinkle less in collisions, keep their gas like careful savers? Does the rim encourage generosity, streams of matter passing inward, like neighborly casseroles left on a doorstep? Each answer, even if tentative, lets us draw the void with more feeling and fewer assumptions. All of this can sound like promise nodded to urgency. It is not. The future of mapping quiet is not a race to fill blankness. It is a vow to sit longer with silence, to let instruments breathe into their strengths, to ask questions with a kindness that welcomes partial replies. The Boötes Void will be there tomorrow and the day after, and 10 million dawns hence. We do not need to hurry toward it. We need only continue to look with the same affectionate curiosity that brought us here, a willingness to be surprised by hush. And in your life, this chapter can be a small forecast of your own. The instruments you already have, attention, patience, and ear for what is not being said, will only improve if you practice them. The quiet rooms you make in your days will acquire residence, overlook thoughts, small joys, shy recognitions that bloom only when given dimness and time. You will refine your definitions of enough. You will grow gentler with edges that refuse to sharpen. You will become the cartographer of a personal Boötes, drawing its borders not to contain, but to understand. The dawn for astronomy will arrive. The ledger will thicken. The faintest lanterns will sign their names, and the map will hum with a little more truth. When it does, we will not say the void is less beautiful. We will say it is more itself. And we, with our better eyes and easier breathing, will be more ourselves in its company. We have traveled far by staying still, a trick as old as story and as reliable as night. The Boötes Void is now a familiar room in your inner house, a wide, patient hollow with a few tender lights. Let us come home by passing through it one last time, as gently as a hand draws curtains closed. Begin where we began, a window, a room that remembers you, a small congress of ordinary things. The air is cooler than your skin. The blanket holds a weather of its own. Outside, the sky gives the old, generous gift, distance dressed as calm. Somewhere in that calm lies the herdsman's domain, and toward it the great hush we have learned to name without demanding sharp edges. Close your eyes and let the map unfurl behind them. See the web as threads of pale fire, the knots as quiet cities, the void as meadow, the rim as a long braided coast. Drift to the meadow's center and stand in the grass. It is not empty. It is simply unhurried. A few porch lights burn. They belong to galaxies that keep their promises across times, so large the numbers lose their teeth and become lullabies. Light, which is memory, passes you like soft-footed animals at dusk. Some come from the rim, with the market's warm hum still in their fur. Some come from the interior, carrying a slower heartbeat. All are headed somewhere, and for a moment, and only a moment, you are that somewhere. Then they go on. You do not need to hold them. They were always on their way. Turn slowly. The edge appears and disappears depending on where you look, the way the boundary between worry and rest shifts when you breathe. In one direction, the lights thicken, in another, they thin. You walk a few steps, and the balance changes. No gate, no noise, only a gradient you can traverse as many times as you like without wearing it out. You remember what the lowlands taught, that motion exists even in quiet, that the outward breeze of underdensity is patient and kind, that rules whispered at the universe's beginning are still being followed without strain. You remember the faintest lanterns and feel protective of them, the way one feels protective of a nightlight left for late travelers. You remember the simulations, the practice dances that taught us the rhythm, and smile at the thought that our guesses, when made with care, are not insults to reality, but invitations. Now bring the scale back, as if turning a dimmer in reverse. The web softens into a handful of bright smudges. Those smudges resolve into a single spiral we call home, then into a neighborhood of stars, then into a solar system where planets keep their long, courteous appointments. The moon exists again as a neighborly stone. Clouds have edges. The room has corners. Your breathing is the metronome for everything that matters within reach. On the table lies the smallest map of all, the layout of your evening, a glass, a book, a phone turned face down so it cannot audition for your attention. These are the filaments of your quiet, and the void you have made between them is where rest lives. You do not need to fill it. You do not need to inventory it. You have learned with the Boötes Void's help that space is not neglect, it is design. If you are still awake, no requirement, just an observation. Let a few reflections settle like birds finding their perches. Perhaps that emptiness you worried about in your week is simply under density waiting to teach you comfort. Perhaps the borders you tried to draw so sharply will be more faithful if they blur. Perhaps the faint thing you almost ignored is a lantern you will be glad to tend. Scientific sentence you can carry into sleep is the gentlest. It appears, it suggests, it is likely, and that is enough for tonight. We return at last to the window. The dark is layered, as it always was. Somewhere out there, the Boötes Void hums its low meadow note. You do not need to hear it to be soothed by it. You have your own version, a quiet room, a soft edge, a few necessary lights scaled to the body, to the moment, to the breath. Let your jaw loosen. Let your shoulders allow gravity its small victory. Let your thoughts thin into a constellation with fewer stars, easier to recognize, easy to forget. The universe is busy in its bright districts, and it is also resting in its rooms of quiet. Tonight you belong to the latter. No one will come to count. No one will ask you to be brighter. You are allowed to be almost empty, not alone. If sleep takes you, let it. If it lingers at the door, you can meet it halfway, the way a filament meets the edge of a void. No announcement, no ceremony, just a gradient from wake to rest, from many to few, from voices to hush. And should you wake later, the map will still be there, thread and hollow, city and meadow, ready to escort you calmly back to the center of your own wide, kind night.